Thomas Harriot, the benefactor we're celebrating this evening, has one of the smaller portraits in wall. It's on the left as you look towards the high table. It shows a bearded, well-dressed Elizabethan gentleman. It's the man we at least believe to be Harriot. The portrait's in Oriel because Harriot was a graduate of the college, or more properly, a graduate of St Mary Hall. This was an independent hall that existed on the site of what's now our third quad until it was assimilated into Oriel in 1902. Harriot took his degree in 1580 and went on to become one of the great polymaths of the English Renaissance. On his death, exactly 400 years ago this year, his tombstone described him as that most learned Harriot, an Oxonian who cultivated all the sciences, a most studious searcher after truth in mathematics, natural philosophy, and theology. All that, and far more, was true. As a mathematician and a man of science, Harriot stood well ahead of his time. He was ahead even of his slightly younger contemporary Galileo. 6 months before Galileo, he used a telescope to observe the moon and draw a map of the lunar surface. And as Michael Spivey told us in his Commemoration of Benefactors sermon in 2012, Harriot made pioneering contributions across the board in optics, algebra, binary arithmetic, the geometry of map projections, and much more. And yet none of this appeared in his lifetime. And it's only thanks to research on the thousands of pages of notes that Harriot left on his death. It's only thanks to these recent scholarly efforts that we now have a measure of an extraordinary man. It's a measure that we've explored for 30 years now in the college's annual Thomas Harriot lecture. So, a towering intellect, arguably England's greatest mathematical scientist before Newton. And yet, as Dr. Spivey also insisted, Harriot was no closet scholar. And it was as a man of the world that soon after Oxford, he entered the service of his first patron, Walter Raleigh, in London. The move cemented a curious Oriel connection. Raleigh matriculated at Oriel only a few years before Harriot arrived at St Mary Hall. In the event, Raleigh didn't stay long, and it's unlikely that he and Harriot ever met in Oxford. But in London, there was a true meeting of minds. What Raleigh valued in Harriot was Harriot's compulsion to test the bounds of the known and the familiar. The bounds that Raleigh had in mind were ones that mattered to him, of course, of empire and trade. Harriot's main task, in fact, was to prepare the navigators and crew for Raleigh's attempt to establish a colony in what was known at the time as Virginia, it's today's North Carolina. Harriot, though not Raleigh himself, went on the voyage. He mapped the complex Carolina coast, stayed almost a year with the 100 or so colonists, and on his return to England, he wrote his only published work. This was his brief and true report of the newfound land of Virginia. Physically, a modest 48 pages, not much more than a brochure. But it was a landmark in early literature on the New World. And it's the first account of America to be published in English. The book was written for Raleigh and it delivered what Raleigh wanted: practical details about the terrain, the natural resources, access to shipping and so on. But it also harboured a more reflective Harriot, and that's a Harriot I'd like to build into our commemoration of him. Of course, Harriot was on the voyage with a job to do. The job was to help lay the foundations for an English colony on soil that didn't by any stretch of the imagination belong to the English. And in this of all colleges, I think we can understand the ambivalence that's built into Harriot's role. And the ambivalence is unmissable in the text. Harriot's lived experience of a year in America simply didn't square with conventional perceptions of the colonizing process. Earlier accounts by the Spanish conquerors of Aztec and Inca peoples, which Harriot had certainly read, presented empire building as a tough but really pretty straightforward affair. It was a matter of inexorable conquest, fueled by technological superiority and the justifying power of divine destiny in the subjugation of lesser peoples. Harriot soon saw that empire building was anything but easy or inevitable, and the indigenous peoples that he encountered were anything but lesser. Certainly their initial response to the huge ships, the guns, the unfamiliar devices, it was childlike, but that for Harriot would pass, leaving a people who had their place quite as much as Europeans in God's creation, God's grand design. There's no doubt that Harriot's conviction rested in part on a capacious, flexible faith, which I think was bred of an unease at the confessional tensions of Elizabethan England. But it also drew, and I think more powerfully, on the processes of observation and reason that led to the bedrock of truth that Harriot sought in all aspects of his life. It was in pursuit of truth that he learnt the Algonquin language during the winter before the voyage. He learnt it from two Indians who had been brought back to London on a ship reconnoitring the Virginia coast. And by breaking the linguistic barrier in that way, he was uniquely able to explore, not just the newfound land itself, but the culture of the Algonquin people. And what he found was a settled society, a society with a codified social structure, a legal system, and a hierarchy of gods, headed by a single god, even some notion of an afterlife. And for Harriot, this had all the character of a pristine faith, perhaps the faith of a pre-Lapsarian world. Sadly, the military members of the expedition saw the local people very differently. They saw them as dangerous, as obstacles to the colonising mission. And that showed in worsening relations and the eventual beheading of the local chieftain. Harriot saw that for the catastrophe it was. The native population turned against the colonists and forced them to flee for their lives. They were rescued in a passing ship captained by Francis Drake. So where in all this is the benefaction for which we're giving thanks this evening? It lies, I think, in the manner of Harriot's tireless exploration of the unknown. In mathematics, as much as in his encounter with Virginia, Harriot drew on the same well of fortitude of which we heard examples in the readings. Of Abraham, abandoning the familiarity of home to journey through the unknown land of Canaan. Or St. Paul, shipwrecked 3 times, stoned, beaten, but unbound. What Abraham and Paul displayed, what Harriot displayed, wasn't just determination or courage in the face of adversity. The military men from whom Harriot so resolutely distanced himself had plenty of that. Harriot's fortitude was endowed with a higher purpose that sustained and tempered his search for truth. And it's that, I think, his quest for the good as well as the true, which gives his fortitude its moral quality. And it's that which makes Harriot and Harriot's fortitude an example for us all for 400 years.